Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's iText Fireside Chat for Enterprise. It's going to be a live panel discussion with industry leaders on how to meet growing demand in e-signatures and document security. My name is Colin Steele, and I will be your moderator today. I am the head of content at York IE, which is a strategic growth and investment firm here in Manchester, New Hampshire in the United States. Before that, I was the former editorial director at TechTarget for over a decade, and I was also a PR and social media manager at Oracle. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. We have Ralph Hens, who is the CTO of iText Software, Jay Schiavo, who is the Vice President of Product and Markets of Certificate Solutions at Entrust, Tage Borg, who is the CTO of Scrive, and Tomas Garcia Meras, who is the Client Account Leadership Manager at Accenture. Before we get started, I want to also introduce our host, iText Software, to you all. iText is an international software company that specializes in AGPL and commercial software, more specifically for PDF libraries and solutions. They're headquartered in Belgium, but have offices here in the United States, as well as in Singapore. iText solutions are used for various purposes, including invoices, credit card statements, boarding passes, patient documentation, certificates, regular PDF documents, and much more. Clients that use iText include 70% of the Fortune 50. And we also just want to go over some housekeeping rules quickly. First, this recording will be available on demand after the live session. We'll share you the link in an email, which we'll send after the event. You'll also be able to access it from itextpdf.com, as well as the iText YouTube channel. We'd love to hear from you during today's discussion. If you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the questions tab in the webinar application. We'll be answering questions at the end of the discussion. And if we don't get to yours during the webinar, iText will make sure to follow up with you directly afterwards. And finally, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. You can post on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn using the hashtag iText Fireside Chat Series. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming everyone and ask all of our speakers to do a short introduction for the next 10 minutes or so. We'll follow that with a panel discussion and then close with the Q&A. Speakers will be turning on your cameras and unmuting you now. All right, looks like we're still waiting on Jay's camera to be turned on, but while we wait for that, we'll get started with the introductions. There he is. Ralph, can you please start us off with briefly telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do at iText?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Colin. So I'm Ralph Hens. I'm the CTO at iText. I joined the company about 10 years ago. You've already heard a brief introduction about our company, so I'll keep it brief. In a nutshell, we have a strong open source background. A lot of our technology also available under an open source license. Our products allow our users and our customers to integrate especially PDF related functionality in their services, applications, document workflows, and so on. And that functionality obviously also includes document security related features such as encryption and digital signatures, for example.
Great, well, thank you for hosting us all today. Tage, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Tage Borg. I'm the CTO at Scrive, as Colin just told you. I've been with the company for almost 10 years in different capacities. Scrive is a electronic signing, digital identity, and document management solution. We're on a mission to make all document processes easier, simpler, and more secure. Yeah, that's me, I think. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Tomas?
Hi, my name is Tomas Garcia Meras, and I do currently work for Accenture as a public sector sales manager. I mainly work for just designing and selling, building also e-government solution for the Spanish government, where the electronic signature is it's a nuclear part of it.
Great, and Jay, can you finish off the introductions, please?
Sure. So Jay Scavo, head up the product management team for here at Entrust for our certificate solutions business. So Entrust has a wide range of products from physical that offer physical identities and digital identities. Specifically within certificate solutions, we provide three distinct product lines. One is our public certificates, so public trust certificates from, including TLS, SSL, and verified mark certificates. We also offer a full range of PKI products from on-prem to managed to as a service. And specifically related to this webinar, we have a product line for digital signatures where we offer an on-prem signing server as well as cloud-based signing services and document signing certificates.
Great. Well, thank you, you and everybody for joining us today. Looking forward to this discussion. I wanted to start things off by sharing a little story from myself. A few weeks ago, when promoting this event, I talked about how I just refinanced my house and I had to go through all of these signatures for documents, and some were on paper and some were electronic. So in that spirit, I wanted to kick things off by asking all of you, when was the last time that you had to digitally sign a document, or you had doubts about document security, either electronic or on paper, and what was that experience like? And when was the last time that you signed something on paper that you wish you could have signed digitally? Raf, can you get us started with that, please?
Yes, of course. Most recent digital signing experience I had was a pretty simple one, a vendor agreement that was sent to me via email as a PDF document. Although the document was clearly not designed to be, it didn't have any provisions, or the workflow didn't have any provisions for digital signing. It was probably intended to be printed and then signed and scanned again. But yeah, making things easier and using our own knowledge, I basically used my Belgian EID cards to still add a digital signature to that document. That's probably a bit of a different approach or experience we have here typically. Also in a couple of other regions where we typically carry a personal certificate on our identity cards, which isn't that common across the world. But in some cases, it is quite a convenient way to use that. Regarding document security, from a professional context, we often look into document security in general, trying to support our customers, obviously. From a personal perspective, what I sometimes, or what I occasionally wonder about, is how there's this big distinction, or how a lot of people look differently human security depending whether it's a physical or a digital process, where a lot of faith, a lot of trust is put into signing with a pen, wet ink signatures, and then when we transfer that concept to a digital environment, then suddenly a lot of security related questions pop up. So that's often a surprising distinction, looking at the two processes, putting them next to each other.
You raise a lot of great points about security there, and I definitely want to touch on those in a follow-up question, but let's get everybody else's experiences with the last time they had to sign a document, or wish they could have signed a paper document digitally. Tage, can you talk a little bit about the last time that you had those issues?
I didn't have issues really. Well, if we start with the one where I had to sign something on paper, where I wish it hadn't had to be that way, was when we were trying to issue a new digital identity to our son. And I thought I could do that myself, but the bank refused, needed both parents in place, and I was not allowed to send a power of attorney to my wife to sign it wherever she was and while I was in the bank. They needed it on paper. So we had to go home and sign it and come back. The last time I signed a document electronically, well, we do that a lot. Scrive is growing quite rapidly. So I signed the most recent employment agreement on Tuesday, I checked. So yeah, I don't have trust issues with electronic signatures, but to tack on to Raf's words about how different requirements are made for digital documents as opposed to physical ones, well, I call that the Tesla problem, where you can't trust a self-driving car if it's as good as a human, because you're switching from one kind of technology to a different kind, and you need it to be 100 times or 1,000 times better. So it's always a struggle introducing new technology, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and I like the mention of the Tesla problem. That's really interesting. You know, you see minor accidents that involve Teslas on the news all the time, and if you saw minor accidents that involve human drivers all the time on the news, that's all that you would see. So that's a great way to illustrate it. Tomas, I know you have an interesting perspective on signing things on paper versus digital based on some of the regulations there where you are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, on our daily work with the Spanish government, it's just mandatory to use electronic signature for almost every transaction. So I think most of the difficulties with funding is not for the signature itself, it's maybe because we have to sync a large batch of documents, maybe 50, sometimes even more than 100 documents in a single batch. All the time you have to apply digital signature while during mobility, so you have to use your mobile device, and that's a problem. I mean, but for that matter, the Spanish government, I think it's a nice feature, is also distributing custom-made application for doing the electronic signature. Or you can sync large batch of document with a single click. You can just sync your documents with your Android mobile device, your mobile tablet or phone. So it's not I can't say I usually find issues while doing the Spanish signature. Maybe someone forgot they pin from the ID card. Sometimes the digital certificate is expired, so it's out of the validity time. It's this kind of issues. I think it's really easy to work with digital signature nowadays.
Great, thanks. And Jay, can you share your experiences as well?
Yeah, similar to I think what Tage was mentioning, we sign documents digitally or electronically regularly. So whether it be a vendor agreement, whether it be some other document that needs to be exchanged internally, where we're constantly digitally signing or electronically signing documents from a business to business standpoint. So within Entrust, so that's regular. I think the last one I signed was last week. It was a vendor, similar to, I don't know if it was one of the other panelists mentioned a vendor contract, and that's what it was. It was signing a vendor contract electronically, and there was a workflow within the company to get that done, and it was very seamless and easy and worked very well. I think in terms of when there was a time I wish I had to sign something physically versus I wish it was electronically. I have three school-age daughters ranging from university down to grade school, and getting them back to school this fall, there was a lot of paperwork to be signed, and a lot of it was downloading stuff off the internet, physically signing it and sending it back to them in school and things like that, versus it would have been a lot easier if they had some type of electronic process or digital process in place where we could have signed a lot of that documentation that could have made saved a lot of paper and saved a lot of time in terms of downloading stuff and electronic physically signing it. So, and I'd say one challenge I see, especially here in the US, and I think the EU is much further along than we are here in the US, is the concept of identity verification when it comes to these electronic signatures. There's one process I remember going through on a personal experience. I think signing one of the kids up for something, and you put your credit card in and they say, okay, well, here's a, digitally sign or electronically sign this. And, within the application that when I was doing my checkout, I could put in my, I have a Mac laptop. I could put in my, on my touchpad, I could sign, put my initials in JS, but there was no verification of my identity. I think that's one of the big things, especially here, like I said, here in the US is lacking, is as customers do move or businesses do move to more electronic signatures or digital signatures, there's that lack of identity verification. It's okay, just put your signature in and we're going to trust that you are who you are. So that's one issue I see. Again, I think it's more prevalent in the US than the EU, where I know they have other more advanced processes in place.
Right, yeah, and I feel your pain with the all the school paperwork. I've had to fill out my fair share of paper documents with my daughter in elementary school. I think that's a good segue into talking a little bit about some of the forcing functions around digital signing that we've seen over the past year and a half or so with the pandemic. A lot of times the ability to meet in person and sign documents around a table just hasn't been there. And I think that also goes back into what you were saying, Raf, about the issue of security. we've been kind of forced to trust digital signing a little bit more in the past year and a half because it's been our only option for signing things. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you've seen in terms of how COVID has changed the digital signing game in the past year and a half?
Sure. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, the COVID situation, the pandemic has, let's say, forced our hands to accept certain processes, certain workflows where we might have said in the past, just taking the easy route out, saying it's not possible. And then suddenly it turned out that it was possible to do a lot of it in a digital way instead of a physical process. So from that point of view, I think it's clear that the pandemic has been a catalyst for a lot of digitization and digital transformation process. Even looking at something very simple, if I compare going to a bar now compared to 2 years ago, where you still have a physical menu to look at drinks or the food list, now you scan a QR code and you get a digital document on your smartphone, for example. So not exactly the situation where you care a lot about document security, but it's a simple example of how suddenly it is possible to do things in a different way. I think indeed a lot of people working from home suddenly from one day to the other, so to speak. People were working from home and they couldn't rely anymore on the office printer, for example, to just easily print a document, scan it again. I know I typically struggle with my printer at home. Whenever I need it, it's suddenly out of yellow and it doesn't want to print or scan anything else anymore. So just a couple of examples how we've been forced essentially to and really how we've seen a catalyst to accept that new reality and really embrace more of those digital processes.
I also want to loop in what Jay was just talking about into this part of the discussion about how, you know, in some industries and areas you see a lot of adoption around digital signing, and in others, you know, you don't so much, and how that has changed during the pandemic. If anybody has anything they want to weigh in on there, that would be a great jumping off point.
Yeah, I could mention some things I've seen. So yeah, I agree with what Raf says about it's forcing our hands. And one example is we were in an RFP where the potential customer asked for e-signing services. And after a couple of weeks, they actually called us up and said, hey, we need to do this RFP because it's our policy, but it will take approximately 3 months and we can't do any business. Can you please arrange something in the meanwhile? I actually don't know if we won that RFP, but I was just going outside the regular line of work or the regular regulations that they had internally in the company because they were forced to. I also know that one Eastern European country, I now forget exactly which one, actually changed their law to make electronic signing more widely accepted. And the issue there was that there was requirements on form for some documents where you needed to have some particular kind of electronic signature, and maybe some documents actually weren't permitted to be signed electronically. And they changed that just so that business and life could continue in society. So COVID has indeed changed a lot. I disagree about the office printer though, because I think we have one, but I also think you'd need to find a power and network cable to make it work. But that's us being a young and very digital company.
Tomas, I'm interested in your perspective on this, given how, you know, accepted digital signing already had been, if you saw as much of a change as some of the other panelists.
Well, I see a lot of improvement between the relationship between companies and individuals. Because now, right now, you know, if someone said me 2 years ago that almost every work contract when you hire someone will be signed electronically, I wouldn't believe it. I think it's something that it's changing. Also, some kind of work document between companies, you know, non-disclosure agreement, whether all the paperwork when you just working on building a joint venture or this kind of stuff. I think it's all right now. All these documents, at least in my daily job, are digitalizing. So I think it's a nice improvement over the 2 years ago. And also, you said that it started because it's not possible. I mean, I cannot just print the document on paper, just sing it with my pen, then send to to my associate director, to Hacking, then send it to the other company, which while we were home working. It's really not possible. And now that we just back on the office, people are releasing this. Is much easier just to interchange a sync PDF, electronic async document. So I think these changes are here to stay. I'm sure I will never have to print a non-disclosure agreement with a partner and send it with paper, just send it by mail. Of course, we are almost forgotten about the faxes or some stuff like that. This is from the 20 years ago. I think it's a great improvement, and thanks God it's here to stay.
Does everyone agree that it's here to stay and this is an actual digital transformation, or we've just been seeing some patchwork solutions pop up? Well, it's been the only option.
Absolutely, definitely. If you can close a deal in an hour, or go back to closing the deal in 4 days, including actual mail delivery, would you do that? Probably not. I don't think so. So in the cases where hacks and quick fixes have been introduced, I think they'll stay, or at least something similar needs to be there. I just hope that COVID helps the postal carriers by like transporting packages from shopping instead of envelopes with contracts in them.
Well, I think it's too the investments people are making in this, or companies are making in this as well, right? Those investments, they're not just going to throw them away. They're seeing the benefits of those investments, and that and that's where a lot of the focus is for these companies. So I think the investments are too big for them to just walk away.
That's a good point. It's not just like we're just going to do this for the time being. You have to kind of put some resources behind it to make it work, and you don't want to give up on those, especially after seeing all of the benefits. Shifting gears a little, some of this has already been touched on, but different customers, depending on what industry they're in and where they're located in the world, often need to have certain certifications or follow certain standards when dealing with documents. What are some of the different standards for information processing or security or digital signing that everybody has come in touch with, and how do you deal with those given how different they are across industries and geographies? Jay, if you want to start us off with that would be great.
Yeah, so being in the business of issuing digital certificates for digital signing, we have a lot of different regulations and compliance items that we need to deal with. Everything from how we store the key, making sure everything is 140-2 to the way we authenticate individuals or companies that we're issuing certificates to. So there's a lot of different standards out there, from WebTrust and other requirements that the vendors must follow. In terms of the companies, I think one of the big things that's driving a lot of the initiatives out there is eIDAS and the requirements they have, not only on the vendors that are providing electronic signature solutions, whether that be the workflows, whether that be the signing services or the certificates themselves, but the requirements they bring to the companies and the signatures themselves. So I think there's a lot from that's one of probably the biggest driver in the industry that we're seeing is the eIDAS regulations, from everything from the actual consumers to the businesses to the vendors that are involved in delivering the solutions.
Ralph, can you talk a little bit more about some of those standards, especially like here in the States? Jay mentioned FIPS quickly. That's for use in a lot of the government agencies and contractors. How is that influencing other standards and policies that we're seeing in other places?
Yeah, looking at standards as well, being a technology provider, we focus a lot of standards, but especially on technical standards. Interoperability, compatibility are very important for us, being part of that document workflow ecosystem. So that's where we're also actively involved in standardization efforts through PDF Association, for example, but also through ISO committees. But as I mentioned, mostly on a technical level, we don't deal so much with process standards directly, let's say. We mostly deal with document and security standards on technical implementation level. You mentioned FIPS specifically. It's an important one for us. We do see it as a requirement from our customers. So that's something that we pay attention to, but it's also not something, it's not a standard that we can support completely from our side, from a technical perspective being a technology provider. It's a standard that also our customers need to take care of, integrating our technology in their services or products, or however they want to use our technology. So in that perspective, I would call us a piece of the puzzle in supporting FIPS.
Just to follow up on that with some of the other panelists, you know, there is so much interoperability involved in digital signing, as Raf was just saying. You know, how do you deal with that? Because, you know, you want to make sure that people that are signing the documents are able to do it, and nobody likes to, you know, get a document and then have to download another program to sign it, or you know, do what they need to do. How do you deal with that aspect of the standards discussion?
Maybe I can have a stab at that. So the highest level of standard that we need to comply with is essentially contract law. It's not encoded in any way internationally. Luckily, all countries have approximately the same rules, as we wouldn't be able to do business cross-border. So like an agreement is an agreement, and it's very free form. So as opposed to EIDAS, which is less free form, but it's specifically about electronic signing. But that means that signing something can be done in many different ways. Like verbal agreement is usually okay in most countries. In many cases, you can just answer yes in an email, and that would be an electronic signature. The cursed button that says yes, I accept cookies is also an electronic agreement. So there are many ways of doing it simply and without fancy mathematical things such as public key infrastructure and so on. So in our case, the way we tackle this, and we have customers in I think 40 countries, a few thousand, 5,000 customers, we offer different kinds of signatures, anything from just clicking a button all the way to qualified electronic signatures, which is where EIDAS stops being technology neutral. You have to use PKI. But yeah, so we bump into the standards all the time, but we also need to find ways to work without the standards and still have trust in the signing process. And then you need to collect evidence about the signing process in other ways, and collect evidence of identity in other ways. So yeah, standards are a bit split. They're very good for some things like interoperability and trust, but sometimes you need to go outside of the standards and not just to make it possible for people in different countries, different geographies to sign the same document, but also to innovate sometimes. Standardization is a slow process. That's probably the downside of it.
Yeah. Well, I also, from a technical point of view, I really miss that some kind of national infrastructure, maybe European infrastructure, for issuing the electronic signature to the citizens. I mean, okay, we'll have some free application, you know, you can do with Adobe and also some open source programs, but we need to make this process easier for the citizens, and also allow some kind of advanced features for electronic signature. I mean, like long-term validation, like timestamps that are currently, I mean, we here in Spain don't have any EIDAS timestamp authority who is giving the timestamps for free, so we cannot do as a citizen long-term validation. I cannot even subscribe because those are some kind of enterprise services. For a single citizen, it's not possible to do a signature with a timestamp. Also, small companies cannot just also have the needed infrastructure to move their electronic signatures to long-term validation signatures. So I think it's quite a gap, so we can move to a more advanced scenario in this area.
So we talked a lot about, you know, how digital signing has evolved, especially over the past year and a half. I want to kind of look towards the future now and where we see the technology and the market going in the future. Jay, can you start us off with that?
Yeah, so earlier in the conversation, I kind of gave the example with the kind of the signing process where it's an issue, especially in the US, with the lack of identity verification. So I think how identity verification evolves as part of the a lot of electronic signature process is where I think a lot of the change is going to happen. Today, there are tools out there and there are ways to authenticate a consumer or customers as they're doing their digital signature, but in some of those cases it's either manual or it's a bit more too time consuming. So I would think where one of the big changes we anticipate seeing is the ability to identify that the identity of an individual as they're about to sign is going to get much easier, much more automated, and things like the digital ID wallets that are starting to take place in the US, in Europe, and we're actually starting to see some of that in the US. We're starting to see Apple and some others that are looking at in some of the states in the US that are starting to look at electronic driver's licenses. So I think that as you get, that's probably one of the biggest innovations we see is those digital IDs, whether they be that will be stored on your phone. So as you're going to do you're going through these processes, you're able to present that in an automated way that's going to be fast and seamless for the e-signature experience. I think that, and then probably the other thing we see is kind of getting them more on the technical side is the a lot we've already seen this, but there's going to be a lot more moving to the cloud, a lot more in terms with the signing keys that are used for, especially with digital signatures, providing that in a seamless way for the customer to get access to those keys and again not disrupt that signing process.
What else does everybody else see when they look into the crystal ball?
Well, I think that I tend to see electronic signing or digital signatures, which is a means of electronic signing, as something that is done often to some kind of agreement. Sometimes it's just an acceptance document or something, but usually an agreement. And many of us probably have Netflix, and we actually electronically signed something there when we accepted the terms and conditions. But you never had to pick out your physical ID card with a chip or use your digital identity or anything. In fact, you just tick the checkbox and then you entered your credit card. And that's a low value transaction where if your credit card stops working, you've broken the terms of service, but all that happens is that the service gets turned off. You're not dragged to court or anything. So that's sort of a low risk, low value transaction. And those, I think, will get easier and easier to perform. And that means that the legislators will actually move more and more kinds of documents into categories where you don't need an advanced or qualified type signature. You don't need that much of identification because the contract, while useful and important, at least en masse, it's not, the individual contract is not that important. So those, I think, will become more commodity and cheaper, and the laws will even adapt to that, maybe the standards as well, even though laws are usually slower than standards. But yeah. But then you have on the other end of the spectrum, you have the high risk or high value transactions, maybe opening bank accounts or purchasing property, or maybe just a car, leasing, these sort of things. Those are high risk and high value, and there I think requirements will sort of increase. And that's an interesting thing to be part of there, to see that. So I think you'll be seeing some kinds of electronic signatures be commoditized and some getting even more security and standardization probably.
Great. Tomas, where do you see the future going?
Well, I'd say that there's some different kinds of electronic signature will coexist in the real world. Here, at least here in Spain, most bank offices, most car dealers, etc. A lot of even supermarkets are using biometric signature just to get some kind of paperless solution for getting the signature from the clients. Some other people are just introducing some kind of simple signature, just a button. We said, hey, I agree, and this is a signature by Iris. It's of course a low level. As Tech said, it's for low complexity, low risk transaction, and there's also I think a big space for a certificate-based electronic signature and qualification certificate. The highest level of legal trust and the highest level of electronic signature, and there will be this when you're signing a contract, when you're just doing some kind of high-level relationship with the public administration, when you're doing some kind of high-risk transaction, and there will be the space for digital-based signature. And also, we'll start seeing some kind of self-sovereign identity transaction with blockchain, which is inside almost the same technology as digital signature. You know, it's hashes, private and public keys. It's almost the same, but opens a new area which you have yet to explore. To maybe in a year or two, we'll see solutions for a small company using blockchain as an evolution of the traditional certificate-based electronic signature.
I'm glad you mentioned blockchain because I wanted to ask about that. When Jay mentioned, the future of electronic identity verification, so I think that's going to be an important part of it. Thank you for mentioning that. Ralph, I wanted to give you a chance to answer the question about the future quickly before we move on to our last question as well.
Yeah, I think to the earlier points of acceptance of those new processes or digital processes, the barrier that Tage mentioned. I think it's also important to realize that in a lot of ways we're still thinking about digital equivalents of a physical document, but also that notion is changing. In a lot of agreements or data exchanges we currently do, they would have been document based before, and we would have the digital equivalents of a document looking and kind of having the same feeling, the same notion to it. But that is also moving away. I don't think anyone imagined going to an airport with just a QR code 20 years ago, expecting to get on the plane, while now that is readily accepted. So that notion of a boarding pass as a document is completely changed. And I think that's also what we have to think towards in the future, that a lot of it is more about acknowledging or signing, accepting the content of the message, the data, so to speak, much more than the visual representation of the document, which is still kind of poor man's execution of digitizing a physical workflow, is just replicating it one-to-one to a digital environment. So taking that evolution into account, a lot of people do a lot of their online digital efforts just with a mobile device currently, not even using a computer or a laptop. So mobile apps and data exchange instead of document exchange, I think that's also going to be having a big impact on how what we now still call document security and electronic agreements, electronic signatures, how that's going to evolve in the future.
Thank you. We have one more question. And
sorry,
sorry, go ahead, Tage.
Yeah, so this thing with signing something else and something that looks like a paper might be a challenge in court eventually, when you have two people signing the same content, but it looks differently, and they would claim that they didn't sign the same contract. So that might become actually a lawmaker thing to handle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to your earlier point about standards and how sometimes we need to be a bit flexible when it comes to standards, I'm also wondering if the legal frameworks and the legal the lawmaking will follow soon enough to enable that. I think it's clear from recent history that the acceptance and the barrier has been lowered to actually use it in practice. But does it hold in a court of law afterwards? That's I think that's a very valid question at the moment.
Yeah. So we have one question left, and there's at least one audience question that has come in. So I wanted to get through both of these in the few minutes that we have left. If you still have questions for the audience, if you're in the audience and you still have questions, please feel free to send them in the next few minutes so we can get the panel to address them. But our last question here is, have there been struggles that you've experienced or seen occur in businesses with customers who are related to security breaches or other issues with digital signing, either something that you've experienced with your customers or a known breach that you've seen talked about in the industry? Can you just talk about like some real world impacts of how those happen and what the fallout can be? If nobody has any, that would be a great thing for the industry.
The one The one that comes to mind is that very often Adobe Reader is used to view PDFs, and PDFs are often used as contracts. And of course, that's a piece of software that's widely used, and it has vulnerabilities and has had them. And there's been some vulnerabilities in that and in the PDF standard that has made it possible to forge digital signatures, or rather to add contents to a document so that it appears as if that was part of what was signed. Maybe Raf probably knows more about that one than I do.
Yeah, that's indeed also the.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that that's the one that came to mind for me. It's a couple of those potential security issues in PDF we've been dealing with. We typically also work with the security researchers that are looking into that, and it is mostly indeed about the actual visualization of the signed content. So it's not so much I wouldn't call it so much a gap or security issue in the PDF standard, but more an issue with implementation of viewers on how they actually represent the signed content afterwards, where in the end for the end user or the customer, it comes down to the same thing, that it appears that something has been signed that was not actually the content that was signed at the time. So yeah, that's one we've been dealing with. We've been looking into the technical issues there, where in our case for our technology, we're mostly dealing with the creation or the signing of the documents, not so much with the visualization. But obviously, it's a top of mind concern for our users and customers also.
Yeah, Colin, I guess one I'll mention, because Tage and Raf are talking about the standards and local requirements. I think local regulations are very complicated for a lot of customers to handle, and I think there was actually an example in the news recently with the Swiss-based train manufacturer getting their agreement with the Austrian railways nullified because they signed the agreement using a Swiss digital signing provider recognized in Switzerland, but not in the EU. So technically the signatures were qualified, but not legally recognized. And this, and so I think being able to navigate that for the customers, and I think they said Raf and Tage were talking about this earlier, is still a challenge a lot of customers, or is a challenge customers are going to be dealing with.
We have a question that came.
The lawmakers.
Go ahead, Tage.
No, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead with the questions. Not much time left.
So this question came in from Richard Jackson, and it speaks specifically to an American law, but hopefully all of your respective countries have something similar, and we can discuss it further. So how is accessibility from an American Disabilities Act perspective handled in these types of documents?
Well, I know that PDF has provisions for accessibility. So there's one way. I don't remember the names of the standards, but you can supply content so that qualified viewing software will help with accessibility.
Does that kind of go back to what you were saying before? A lot of that falls on the actual software that's displaying the document, or facilitating the signing itself. Yes. Versus the signing technology.
I think so, but then there's another angle to that, and that is the angle is we often talk about what you see is what you sign. So then the question becomes, how would you do this if it were a paper document? Would you send one version in Braille to somebody who's visually impaired and the same text on a different document? Or would that be the same document? So the Disabilities Act, or there's a similar one in Europe, of course, you need to pay attention to that, but what are the legal implications really if there's, for example, context in visual layout of a document that needs to be taken into account when signing it? I don't think the standards generally sort of handle that very well. And as an e-signing provider, you never know what your customer is going to give you for signing by another person. It becomes really, really complex. But PDF does help a bit.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, so thank you for ending on that important note. We'll end the discussion there. If anybody else has follow-up questions, please feel free to follow up with iText, and they'll be happy to answer your questions for you. Thanks to everyone on our panel for joining today, and thank you for everybody in the audience for listening in. You'll receive a link to the recording and an email shortly afterwards. You'll also be able to access it from the website, as I said before, and that website is itextpdf.com. Make sure to register for the next upcoming iText webinar on PDFA, which is called Digital Documents to Withstand the Sands of Time. And if you want to receive further news about iText, feel free to sign up to the news on the website or contact iText or some of our other partners for more information at marketing@itextpdf.com.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks again, everybody. I appreciate your time.